When Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto that stage draped in the national colors of Burkina Faso, no one expected what would come next, not the diplomats watching from behind closed doors, not the general standing at his side, not even the most loyal of his supporters scattered across West Africa, because what he said wasn't just a policy proposal or a passionate speech, it was a declaration of war. Not against a country or a people, but against the very idea of borders, against the fractured legacy that has kept Africa divided and dependent for over a century. Traoré called for something so vast and radical it stunned even seasoned analysts: one government, one currency, and one passport for all of Africa, a single African superstate rising from the ashes of colonialism and post-colonial confusion. He didn't say maybe, he said now, and within hours the continent erupted. Hashtags like hashtag United States of Africa and hashtag Afro Money flooded timelines, and a wave of disbelief, excitement, and outrage swept from Lagos to Kigali to Cape Town, because this wasn't just rhetoric, this was Ibrahim Traoré, the same man who had already expelled foreign troops, rejected IMF deals, and formed new alliances with countries like Mali and Guinea. He had already rewritten the rulebook of African diplomacy, and now he was burning the book entirely, calling for a new African identity not carved by European rulers with maps but forged by Africans themselves with will. And for many young Africans, it felt like someone had finally voiced what they had always sensed deep inside, that the flags and currencies and border stamps were not tools of freedom but of separation, barriers wrapped in bureaucracy that kept brothers apart and nations small. For decades traveling within Africa has been harder than flying to Europe. For decades African trade has been crushed by currency instability and overlapping regulations. But Traoré said the time for waiting is over, and that urgency made this different. From the speeches of old, this wasn't Vision 2063 or long-term dreams, this was action starting today. Already, his advisors were drafting logistics for Afro Money, for the African passport, for a centralized African government, and whether it's realistic or reckless, one thing is clear: he has started a new conversation, one that cannot be undone, one that challenges every African leader to choose between holding on to sovereignty or building something greater. And already the silence is telling, because many governments were caught off guard. There were no meetings, no prior discussions, just a microphone and a message that could reshape the destiny of over 1 billion people. And outside of Africa, in Western capitals, alarms rang quietly, because a united Africa with one voice would mean less control, less leverage, and a shift in the global balance of power. So now the continent stands at a crossroads, inspired and unsettled, divided and yet somehow more united in debate than ever before. And the question remains: is this the beginning of a true African renaissance, or a fantasy destined to break under the weight of its own ambition? To understand why Traoré's call for a united Africa struck such a deep nerve, you have to go beyond his words and trace the scars that run through the continent's history, because this wasn't just a political announcement, it was an ideological reckoning with the lines that divide nations, families, cultures, and futures. Borders in Africa were never drawn for Africans. They were etched by colonial powers in dark rooms with red pens, slicing through tribes, trade routes, and centuries-old communities. Those arbitrary boundaries hardened into national borders after independence, and instead of uniting to heal the damage, many post-colonial governments clung to their inherited maps like badges of legitimacy. And so Africa moved forward divided, with 54 flags, 54 currencies, 54 parliaments, but no single voice. And Traoré's speech ripped open that wound and said it plainly: the experiment has failed, and it's time for something new. His vision for one African government is a rejection of a legacy that rewarded division and punished cooperation. In his mind, a continental authority could oversee defense, manage shared resources, and speak to the world not as dozens of struggling states, but as one rising force. It's not an abstract dream, it's a strategy for survival. And when he said it, millions listened, especially the youth, because they are the ones who've grown up facing travel bans within their own continent, paying high visa fees to visit neighboring countries, watching their currencies devalue while foreign companies extract their minerals. They are tired of begging for trade deals and foreign aid while knowing that together, Africa has the resources, the manpower, and the intelligence to stand on its own. but beyond the sentiment lies real complexity. Uniting Africa means asking presidents to share power, to dissolve national egos into a collective vision. It means asking rich nations to lift weaker ones. It means asking people to shift their identity from Nigerian or Ghanaian or Burkinabe to something bigger, something continental. And these are not easy things to ask. Language barriers, historical rivalries, and economic inequality all stand in the way. But what Traoré understands is that every powerful union in history began in chaos and contradiction. The United States was born of civil war and regional suspicion. The European Union stumbled through decades of disagreement, and yet here they stand, because unity is not built on perfect harmony, it's built on shared purpose, and Traoré is daring Africans to believe that their purpose is greater than their divisions, that they can have one military to defend the continent, one infrastructure plan to connect it, and one foreign policy to protect it from exploitation. It is an idea as old as Pan-Africanism itself, championed by visionaries like Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara. But never before has it come with such urgency or from a leader already taking action. And that's why this isn't just another speech, it's a signal flare, a moment that says the time has come to stop talking and start building. But even as the hope spreads, so too does resistance, from both within and outside the continent, and in the shadows of global power. Not everyone is ready to see Africa speak with one voice. If the vision of one African government is the political heart of Traoré's revolution, then Afro Money is its economic soul, because money in Africa has never just been about transactions, it has been about control, dependence, and the invisible strings that still bind former colonies to their old masters. Currencies like the CFA franc are still pegged to the euro, controlled not in Africa but in European treasuries, and even countries outside that system remain vulnerable, with economies tied to the dollar and euro in ways that leave them exposed whenever foreign markets shake. So when Traoré stood on that stage and declared that Africa would have one currency, his voice carried more than symbolism, it carried rebellion. Afro Money is not just about convenience, it is about liberation, a bold attempt to rewrite the financial rules that have long kept the continent fragmented and weak. Imagine an Africa where a trader in Senegal doesn't worry about converting to euros to buy goods from Ghana, where young entrepreneurs in Kenya can access investment from Burkina Faso without losing value to exchange fees, where inflation rates don't spiral because foreign banks tweak interest rates oceans away. That's the dream Afro Money offers, a single currency backed by African resources, regulated by an African central bank, and designed to fuel intra-African trade at a scale never seen before, because right now, only 17% of African trade happens within the continent, most of it goes to Europe, Asia, or the US, a pattern that bleeds wealth outward instead of recycling it inward. Afro Money, in theory, changes that, creating a vast common market, lowering transaction costs, stabilizing prices, and giving Africa something it has never truly had, monetary sovereignty. But the dream is heavy, and the road is steep, because introducing a single currency isn't as simple as printing new notes. It requires aligned fiscal policies, shared inflation targets, banking harmonization, and, above all, trust. And trust is scarce in a continent with over 50 governments, different ideologies, and vastly unequal economies. How can oil-rich nations like Nigeria or Angola agree to share monetary control with struggling economies? How do you convince powerful central banks to hand over decision-making to a new continental institution? How do you protect against economic shocks when one policy must serve them all? Even the European Union, with all its wealth and integration, has struggled with these questions under the euro, and Africa's diversity makes the challenge even harder. But the difference here is that the call is coming from a place of necessity, not luxury. Africa cannot afford to remain chained to outdated financial models that serve others more than itself. Afro Money is a risk, yes, but so is the status quo, and that's why Traoré's proposal has struck a chord with the youth, students, small business owners, freelancers, and digital workers who are already thinking continentally, who see currency unification not just as economics but as identity. Already designs for Afro Money banknotes are surfacing online, featuring African heroes, languages, and symbols. Already conversations are happening in markets and cafes, not just in ministries and banks, and that energy matters, because it means the idea is no longer just Traoré's, it belongs to the people, and if they believe in it, it could become real, because that is the quiet power of currency. It is as much psychological as it is financial, and for too long African money has carried the face of dependency. Maybe it's time for it to carry the face of unity. If Afro Money is meant to unify Africa's economy, then the African passport is meant to liberate its people, because for too long Africans have been treated like strangers in their own homeland, needing visas, permits, and approvals just to cross imaginary lines carved by foreign powers more than a century ago, borders that were drawn without consent, that split tribes, scattered families, and caged opportunity. Today an African student can fly to France more easily than to a neighboring country, a trader can ship goods to China faster than across a regional border, and an entrepreneur faces more red tape moving between African states than doing business overseas. And Traoré says enough. He proposes one African passport that grants every citizen the right to live, work, and travel freely across all 54 nations, a simple document that tears down a century of mental and political walls. This is not a new idea. Versions of it have appeared in AU documents, in ECOWAS agreements, in vague promises that never fully arrived, but what makes Traoré's call different is the urgency, the clarity, the demand to act now, not by 2063 or some distant horizon, but in this generation, because for many young Africans this isn't just about convenience, it's about dignity. To be told you can't visit your own continent without permission feels like exile. To be treated like a foreigner in countries that share your culture, your language, your history is a wound that has never healed, and Traoré's passport is a chance to heal it, to build not just economic bridges but human ones, to foster connection, love, and understanding where once there was suspicion. Socially, it could spark a cultural renaissance, where artists, musicians, thinkers, and creators move freely, collaborate, and redefine African identity on their own terms. Economically, it could unlock labor markets, drive tourism, and help industries flourish across borders, but most importantly, it could plant the seed of a new psychological reality, one where being African means something deeper than national citizenship, one where your home isn't just a flag or a capital, but an entire continent, a place you belong to without explanation. But this vision, like the others, is not without resistance. Critics argue about security, fearing that open borders could spread insurgency or overwhelm fragile systems. Others worry about migration waves destabilizing wealthier states or public services buckling under pressure, and these fears are real. They cannot be ignored, because for one passport to work, Africa must build a trust system deeper than paper. It must invest in infrastructure, create shared security databases, align immigration policies, and most of all, believe in each other. That belief is hard to manufacture, especially in regions scarred by conflict and political betrayal. But belief is also where all revolutions begin, and the people are already imagining what freedom could feel like. Students in Nairobi dream of studying in Dakar without a visa. Farmers in Uganda imagine selling goods in Accra without checkpoints. Families in Ethiopia picture visiting relatives in Eritrea without border guards. The African passport is not just a travel document, it is a mirror reflecting the continent's hunger for unity, and if it becomes real, it may just be the most powerful symbol yet that Africa is finally ready to call itself home. Now the question that echoes from the streets of Accra to the boardrooms of Addis Ababa, from classrooms in Lagos to farms in Kigali, is not whether Traoré's dream is bold, it is whether Africa can survive trying to make it real, because the vision of one government, one currency, and one passport sounds like a fairy tale wrapped in justice, but building it means tearing through everything that came before, and that kind of change never comes quietly. It demands sacrifice, patience, and above all, courage, the courage of leaders to surrender some power for something bigger, the courage of nations to trust their neighbors as partners not rivals, the courage of people to reimagine what it means to belong. But political will is fragile, and unity, while beautiful, is heavy. African presidents may agree with the dream in principle, but not all will be ready to give up sovereignty. National parliaments may stall, military regimes may resist, fragile democracies may fear being absorbed, and richer economies may hesitate to lift poorer ones. The reality is that Africa is a continent of extremes, oil giants beside landlocked nations, peaceful republics beside conflict zones, and these imbalances will test any effort to centralize power or share resources. The African Union has tried and struggled, regional blocs have promised but faltered, and now Traoré steps forward not with a treaty but with a torch, hoping the people will light the path ahead, and in many ways they already are. Because the loudest voices in this movement are not diplomats, they are students, artists, farmers, coders, truck drivers, and teachers who see past the old lines and hear the call for something more. They are the ones reposting Afro Money designs, debating a united Africa on TikTok and Twitter, painting murals of a borderless map, dreaming of a future their parents never had the right to imagine. And yet dreams alone are not enough. For Afro Money to work, Africa must build a new financial architecture. For the passport to work, Africa must build trust, security, and infrastructure, and for one government to work, Africa must decide what kind of leadership it wants, democratic, military, rotational, representative, and who will guard the new power from becoming the old problem. Even now, foreign powers are watching closely, some with concern, some with fear, because a united Africa means a stronger Africa, one that cannot be manipulated with debt, divided by deals, or distracted by conflict planted from outside. And history shows that whenever African leaders rise with clarity, resistance follows, sometimes subtle, sometimes violent, but maybe this time is different, because this time the vision doesn't belong to one man, it belongs to a generation. And that generation is connected, awake, and ready to rewrite the story not just of a country but of a continent. Traoré may have spoken the words, but it will be the people who make them true or let them fade, and if they choose to believe, truly believe, that the age of division must end, then the world will witness something history has never seen, a continent once colonized and carved apart rising as one. And yes, there will be failures, delays, betrayals, and setbacks, but if the foundation is laid in purpose not pride, in equality not ego, then the dream may live, and one day future generations will not ask whether Africa can unite. They will ask why it ever waited so long.